because anything good, I didn't know how to do it. I remember a lot of times where I didn't want to live because I was always left in the house by myself, door wide open. Mom and dad, my dad is locked up. My mom's on drugs. Man, I seen a lot of people get killed that I shouldn't have seen when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I come playing in the playground, and my friends.
Chicago, a city known for its resilience, its culture, and its spirit. But beneath the skyline and bustling streets, there are stories that chilled even the toughest neighborhoods. Stories not of hardened criminals with decades of experience, but of teenagers who committed crimes so brutal, so calculated, that they left the entire city in shock. These were not petty offenses. They were acts of violence that showed a level of coldness beyond their years. From calculated ambushes to senseless murders, these teens earned a place among Chicago's most dangerous. How does a child cross the line into becoming a ruthless killer? What drives a teenager to terrorize entire communities? In this video, we will uncover the dark cases of the most evil teens who terrified Chicago, exposing the shocking investigations, the legal proceedings that followed, and the haunting psychological questions that still linger. Stay with me, because these stories are darker, more disturbing, and more unforgettable than anything you've heard before. Case 1. Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, Crime of the Century. In the spring of 1924, Chicago was shaken by a crime so audacious that newspapers quickly called it the crime of the century. Two wealthy young men, Nathan Leopold, 19, and Richard Loeb, 18, set out to commit what they believed would be the perfect murder. Both were from prominent families, educated at elite institutions, and destined for privileged futures. Yet beneath their polished appearances was a dark fascination with dominance, intellectual superiority, and the thrill of crime. Their victim would be a 14-year-old boy named Bobby Franks, who lived in their neighborhood and trusted them. What followed was not just a shocking act of violence, but a legal battle that redefined American criminal law. Leopold, the intellectual, was a prodigy with an IQ estimated far above average and a deep interest in philosophy, particularly the writings of Nietzsche. He was obsessed with the idea of the Superman, a figure beyond morality and law which he believed described himself. Loeb, on the other hand, was charismatic, handsome, and outgoing. He was drawn to crime as a form of excitement, having already dabbled in petty theft, vandalism, and arson before graduating to bigger fantasies. Together, they formed a partnership in which Leopold provided the ideology and Loeb supplied the daring. On May 21, 1924, the two put their plan into action. They lured Bobby Franks into a car, driven by their sense of superiority and thrill for risk. The investigation that followed quickly exposed their supposed perfect crime. A pair of eyeglasses left at the crime scene became the crucial piece of evidence. Unlike most glasses, this pair had a unique hinge ordered by only 3 people in Chicago at the time, one of whom was Nathan Leopold. The arrogance of Leopold and Loeb worked against them. They assumed their intelligence would keep them above suspicion, yet their sloppy mistakes revealed otherwise. As the investigation tightened, the young men confessed under pressure. Their admissions shocked Chicago society. Newspapers sensationalized every detail, not only because of the brutality of the act, but because of who committed it. 2 boys with everything to live for, educated at the University of Chicago and sons of millionaires. The case became a symbol of moral decay among the privileged. The defense attorney Clarence Darrow represented the young men. Instead of contesting their guilt, Darrow focused the trial testimony on saving them from the death penalty. He delivered a 12-hour closing argument that became one of the most famous speeches in American legal history. Darrow argued that their youth, mental instability, and distorted psychological development should spare them execution. He introduced expert testimony from leading psychiatrists, who described the offenders' fragile states of mind their obsession with dominance, and their inability to form healthy moral judgment. This was one of the earliest high-profile cases where psychological analysis was central to the defense. At the sentencing hearing, the world waited to see if the court would impose the ultimate punishment. Judge John Caverly ultimately sentenced Leopold and Loeb to life imprisonment plus 99 years, sparing them execution. His ruling acknowledged both the brutality of the crime and the influence of youth and psychological disturbance in shaping their actions. Inside prison, the two young men followed very different paths. Loeb continued his charismatic persona, but his life was cut short when he was killed by another inmate in 1936. Leopold, however, sought rehabilitation. He immersed himself in study, teaching languages to fellow prisoners, and later spearheading educational programs within the prison system. His efforts reflected a transformation that fascinated criminologists and reform advocates. In 1958, after serving more than 3 decades, Leopold was paroled. He moved to Puerto Rico, where he lived quietly, working in medical research and community service until his death in 1971. Case 2. William Lipstick Killer Ahrens. In the summer of 1946, Chicago was gripped by a crime story so shocking that newspapers branded it the work of a lipstick killer. At the center of the case was not a hardened career criminal, but a 17-year-old boy named William Ahrens. His name would become synonymous with fear and manipulation. From the moment police closed in on him, the nation watched in disbelief as the teenager's life unraveled in the glare of public outrage and sensational headlines. William Ahrens was not the image of a troubled runaway or an idle delinquent. He was a bright scholarship student, known for his intelligence and his quiet, introverted nature. Yet beneath that seemingly ordinary surface, investigators and prosecutors argued, existed a deeply fractured psychological profile. They claimed Ahrens had an obsessive compulsion toward burglary that escalated into violent crime. To the public, the case raised an unnerving question. How could a gifted teenager with a promising academic path transform into what authorities described as a ruthless killer? In the months leading up to his arrest, Chicago had been rocked by a string of burglaries and 2 murders that shocked entire communities. One of the most chilling clues was a message scrawled in lipstick at a crime scene, reading, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more." It was this taunting note that inspired the media to label the unknown suspect the lipstick killer. When police apprehended Ahrens during a botched burglary attempt, they suddenly believed they had found their man. Evidence from his home, including items linked to the crimes, began to piece together a disturbing narrative that prosecutors eagerly embraced. The legal proceedings against Ahrens became a national spectacle. From the outset, his defense faced nearly insurmountable challenges. Interrogations reportedly stretched on for days, and Ahrens later claimed he was pressured into confession under psychological strain and without proper legal safeguards. In court, Ahrens ultimately chose to plead guilty to 3 murders in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. At the sentencing hearing, the weight of the proceedings was extraordinary. Ahrens, just 17 years old when arrested, now stood before a judge facing the possibility of never again seeing freedom. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment, ensuring that his fate was sealed before he even reached adulthood. Inside prison, Ahrens lived for decades under the shadow of his conviction. While incarcerated, he sought opportunities for rehabilitation, turning toward education and service. He completed college courses, worked as a prison librarian, and even taught other inmates. To some, this dedication to self-improvement reflected a young man who might once have been capable of change had his path taken a different direction. To others, it was far too little, too late, given the devastating crimes tied to his name. The case of the lipstick killer also highlighted the evolving strategies of law enforcement. By the time of his death in 2012, William Ahrens had spent more than 6 decades behind bars, the longest-serving prisoner in Illinois at the time. His story remains both haunting and instructive. On one hand, it is a tale of horrific crime and the determination of investigators to protect public safety. On the other, it is a cautionary narrative about the dangers of sensationalism, coercion, and the difficulty of balancing punishment with the possibility of rehabilitation. Case 3. Robert Yummy Sandifer. At just 11 years old, Robert Yummy Sandifer became a symbol of how quickly childhood can be consumed by crime, poverty, and violence. His story is both shocking and tragic, beginning in Chicago's South Side, where instability and neglect shaped nearly every moment of his short life. By the time he was in grade school, Yummy had already been in and out of juvenile facilities, his name well known to police and social workers. Yet what made his case so unforgettable was not just his age, but the way his life spiraled into violence that ended with him both taking a life and losing his own within days. Born in 1983, Sandifer grew up in an environment defined by dysfunction. His father was absent, and his mother, struggling with substance abuse, was unable to provide stability. Much of his early life was spent in the hands of relatives and foster care, where neglect and abuse were reported. These early experiences left deep scars on his psychological profile, shaping a child who never truly had the chance to form trust or discipline. Instead, he gravitated toward the streets, where gangs offered a distorted sense of belonging that the traditional structures of family and school had denied him. By the age of 8, Sandifer had already been charged with multiple offenses, ranging from theft to arson. His young mind was marked by a startling pattern of defiance and impulsivity, traits commonly identified in juvenile psychological evaluations. What stood out in his case was not only the severity of his actions but the chilling maturity with which he embraced gang culture. He was quickly adopted as a recruit by the Black Disciples, a powerful Chicago gang, who saw his age as both a weapon and a shield. A child this young was unlikely to face serious legal proceedings, making him an asset for carrying out dangerous acts. The defining crime occurred in August 1994, when Yummy was ordered to fire at rival gang members. In the chaos, bullets struck 14-year-old Siobhan Dean, a girl who had nothing to do with the conflict. Her death shocked Chicago, igniting outrage over how someone so young could be responsible for such devastation. The police investigation quickly centered on Sandifer, who fled after the shooting. For 3 days, his face was plastered across news outlets, a child fugitive caught in a web of violence larger than himself. What followed was a manhunt filled with tension and disbelief, as law enforcement struggled to reconcile the image of a small, baby-faced boy with the serious crime he had committed. The case never reached traditional trial testimony or a sentencing hearing because Sandifer himself never made it to court. As the investigation unfolded, the very gang that had used him decided he was now a liability. Afraid that he would cooperate with police or draw too much attention, older gang members lured him under the pretense of safety. Instead, his short life ended in another act of violence, executed by teenagers only slightly older than him. The child who had become infamous for murder was himself silenced by the same cycle of brutality that had defined his existence. While no courtroom ever heard Yummy's trial testimony, his case left a lasting mark on criminal justice debates. Robert Sandifer's story is not only about crime, but also about the consequences of neglect and the cost of failing to protect vulnerable children. His name remains etched in the public memory as both a cautionary tale and a call to action. Case 4. Jesse Rankins, 10, and Tykees Johnson, 11. On a chilly October evening in Chicago in 1994, a shrill scream echoed through a vacant high-rise hallway before a 5-year-old boy tumbled from the 14th floor. That boy, Eric Morse, had simply refused to steal candy, and the children responsible were barely older than he was. Jesse Rankins, age 10, and Tykees Johnson, age 11, abducted Eric and dropped him to his death from the window of a Ida B. Wells Holmes apartment. The incident sent shockwaves across the nation and sparked a fierce law and order debate. Police secured testimony from Eric's older brother, Derek Lemon, who had tried to stop the fatal act. Although bruised by hubris and fear, the boy's courage gave weight to the prosecution's case. Investigators pieced together behavioral details that would later feed into the psychological profile. Two vulnerable children molded by trauma, learning disabilities, unstable family environments. Rankins had been abandoned by a drug-addicted mother. Johnson was supported by his mother's steady presence. But both shared histories of neglect and hardship. Illinois lawmakers cut the minimum age for incarceration to 10 in reaction, a measure hardly seen as rehabilitative. Rankins and Johnson were convicted of first-degree murder and each received the maximum 5-year prison term allowed under juvenile law. In the trial testimony, Judge Carol Kelly, overseeing her first juvenile case, noted that both boys were profoundly damaged, a statement that spoke less to coldness than to grief for childhoods lost to the system. Defense attorneys had argued for placement in treatment facilities, rather than prison, so each boy might one day resemble anything close to normal. When the sentencing hearing concluded, two small children found themselves entangled in an adult world of isolation, illiteracy, and institutionalization. Rankins emerged with a 4th-grade education and functional illiteracy. Johnson fared somewhat better but still lacked support and opportunity. Rankins, interviewed years later, recounted recurring nightmares of being thrown from high rises, revealing how the crime haunted him deeply. His lawyer would say, "How could he change? He's been locked in a time warp." Johnson, upon release, battled relapse into crime and repeated prison reentry, showing how diminished support systems led to repeated failure. By the time Rankins was released in his mid-20s, he had barely held a job, never used the internet, and struggled with basic tasks. He described being set up to fail, and indeed both men re-entered prison soon after multiple times. The tragic irony is that the system designed to punish them rarely offered genuine hope for change. Case 5. Antonio Reyes. A teenage boy, Antonio Reyes, now 21, charged with 6 murders and 4 attempted murders, all committed when he was just 16 to 17 years old, set into motion a saga that would disturb a city and unearth cold, unsettling truths about randomness and violence. Investigation into Chicago's southwest neighborhoods of Gage Park, Brighton Park, and Clearing revealed that 5 strangers, none knowing Reyes, were gunned down between March and November 2020, with 3 young children narrowly surviving an attack that claimed their father's life. Lives suddenly and inexplicably ended. None of these people had ever met Antonio Reyes before, and there's no reason to suspect he had any reason to target them, said the Cook County State's attorney. There is a high disregard for human life so profound it defies common motive. Detectives painstakingly traced the pattern, connecting disparate scenes through ballistic evidence. A .40 caliber handgun linked all attacks. And digital trails, social media postings, surveillance video, and tips that gradually assembled the mosaic of a serial killer driven by something far darker than revenge or ideology. As Reyes pleaded not guilty, the defense positioned to challenge evidence or interpretation, while prosecutors leaned on the mounting links, from shell casings to his chilling online messages. In one haunting exchange, a victim's grieving mother confronted Reyes on Snapchat, asking about her missing son, and received a chilling reply, "That's why your son is rotting in hell." That testimony became pivotal trial testimony in sealing a portrait of calculated cruelty. The sentencing hearing may still be in the future, but the groundwork is laid for a dramatic courtroom confrontation. For families of the deceased, this journey is as much about finding answers as about establishing justice. Public sentiment, meanwhile, swings between horror at the randomness and relief that law enforcement's investigation and ballistics work removed such a violent presence from the streets. In the unpeeling layers of Antonio Reyes's psychological profile, one sees not the familiar trope of rage or revenge, but an almost clinical indifference. The randomness of the attacks. Victims shot while buying soda, sitting in a car, walking across a street, underscores a profound unpredictability that challenges our sense of security. Case 6. Max Flagg, 17. Grimes' sisters' investigation. Something felt off from the very first moment. Two teenage sisters, bound by laughter and Elvis songs, vanished into Chicago's cold December night. Barbara, 15, and Patricia, 12, left their McKinley Park neighborhood on December 28, 1956, clutching $2.50 for a double Elvis feature. By midnight, they had vanished, and a massive investigation began. Hundreds of police officers, volunteers, and an urgent task force swarmed the streets, waterways, and bus routes, distributing 15,000 flyers and questioning 300,000 people. Yet all seemed to crumble into dead ends. Within days, sensational theories swirled. Did they run away to Nashville, chasing Presley's music? Could it have been an Elvis look-alike in a green Mercury who tricked them into a car? When the girls' naked bodies emerged 25 days later, frozen by winter's grip on a rural road, the tone shifted, now weighed by tragedy. Multiple coroners offered conflicting conclusions about their time of death and cause. One pegged it to within 5 hours of disappearance, attributing death to secondary shock. Yet another insisted evidence, wounds, body ice patterns, suggested they'd been alive much longer. Amid competing autopsy legal proceedings, the tension rose not just between evidence but psychology. Were these wounds inflicted pre- or post-mortem? Could sexual violence have occurred? One pathologist even posited that some of the injuries were rodent-caused after death. The chills in that revelation still echo decades later. Enter Max Flagg, aged 17, a boy standing at the center of suspicion. Pushed into an unofficial polygraph, he allegedly confessed to abducting and murdering the sisters. But because Illinois law forbade polygraphs for minors, prosecutors had no legal avenue to act on that confession. Without any physical evidence, he walked free. Beyond Flagg, other leads emerged. Edward Benny Bedwell, resembling Elvis, confessed, but his version collapsed under scrutiny. Records showed he was working elsewhere during the critical hours. Autopsy reports found no evidence of food or alcohol he claimed the girls consumed. A self-proclaimed psychic, Walter Krantz, dreamed of the body's location nearly accurate, yet no forensic link bound him to the crime. Years later, a retired detective turned his gaze back to the case. Raymond Johnson resurfaced Charles Leroy Melquist, a convicted child killer whose brutal crime in 1958 bore geographic and behavioral similarities. The lead remains unofficial. Ultimately, no one was tried for the sisters' murders. The case remains open, but morally it begs a reckoning. Public safety depends not only on swift police action, but on safeguarding ethical legal proceedings and avoiding coercion or flimsy links. Case 7. Shondale Gregory, aka Tuka. Shondale Gregory, known to friends as Tuka, was just 15 when his life ended on January 12, 2011, in a moment that shattered a neighborhood and reverberated through Chicago's music scene. While waiting at a bus stop in the Woodlawn neighborhood of Chicago, an unidentified, masked gunman approached. Police would later confirm the teenage boy had been approached at a Southside bus stop and asked a simple question, only for the gunman to move behind the shelter and open fire execution style, 4 rounds striking the victim, who was rushed away but died at the scene near a trash can. The death was deemed gang-related. From that inciting moment, the narrative dives into the psychological terrain of a young life caught between loyalty and circumstance. Shondale, born August 27, 1995, was raised by his mother Dominique Boyd in Chicago's Woodlawn neighborhood. She insists he was loved by so many, not a hardened gang soldier. Yet police and local accounts identify him as part of the St. Lawrence Boys, a set of the gangster disciples. That affiliation placed him directly across the street from O'Block, the Black Disciples' turf. From this tension emerges profile of a teenager who was inexorably entwined with gang landscapes. His death triggered grief and fury. Soon, neighbors memorialized him by renaming their clique Tuka Gang and calling their corner Tukaville. The investigation deepens. Evidence is scant. Eyewitnesses report a lone gunman. Police interviews point through gang lines, and sociologists note how drill music lore and internet banging create a digital mirror for real-world violence. Yet we hear no record of legal proceedings, trial testimony, or sentencing hearing tied to Tuka's murder. No perpetrator ever faced justice in court, and no formal case unfolded in public view. Instead, the courtroom becomes a metaphor for the court of public opinion. Lyrics amplified the tension. Chief Keef, a Black Disciples affiliate, transformed Tuka's memory into a taunt. Smoking on Tuka, mocking the fallen teen. Lil Durk, King Von, and others echoed the phrase, weaving it into drill anthems that fueled public fascination and intergang animosity. These rappers shifts from mourners to provocateurs. Yet even here, in the absence of formal justice, Tuka's mother pursued her own version of a hearing. In interviews, she pushed back hard. My son had nothing to do with nothing in this rap industry. For him to be disrespected and mocked for his death, why? That's all I have to ask. That hearing gave voice to a mourning parent left without legal closure. On the other, an emerging shift, some artists, including Lil Durk and even Gucci Mane, turned away from dissing the dead in their music. That shift signals potential for change, a small sign of healing in a scene historically driven by outrage. Tuka's story became a battlefield, but maybe his legacy can become a turning point. Case 8. Lil Jojo, Joseph J. Coleman, 18. A slight, smiling teenager rapping on a stoop in Chicago's Englewood. His sharp words crackle with challenge. Right from that first breath, the tension is palpable. That young man, Joseph J. Coleman, better known as Lil Jojo, was barely 18. Yet his diss track 300K, dripping with the repeated refrain BDK for Black Disciple Killer, ignited a firestorm. He was taunting a powerful rival, the Black Disciples, in a war with his own gangster Disciples faction. The narrative threads tighten when Coleman, days later, recorded himself mockingly confronting Lil Reese's crew en route to rival territory, almost as if daring retaliation, then carelessly posted his location via social media. Hours later, surveillance cameras captured a drive-by shooting while he rode a bicycle. The swift legal proceedings begin with the Chicago police scouring Chief Keef's tweets for evidence, deeply unsettled by mocking commentary published mere hours after the killing. But the psychological profile of the offender remains more shadow than substance. No arrest was ever made. The case remains open, and the speculation continues to swirl. Authorities investigated possible Black Disciple involvement and even considered Chief Keef's camp, but found no evidence to proceed. The glance toward a suspect named Keith "Kiki" Bonds, later fatally shot himself, offered potential closure to the grieving, yet legal accountability never followed. The story twists further in courtrooms and family interviews where trial testimony might have emerged but never did. No perpetrator stood before a judge, and no sentencing hearing was held. Instead, the mother's grief became part of the public record, suggesting that the rapper behind the mocking tweets paid somebody to kill her son. Case 9. Darien Albert. On September 24, 2009, a 16-year-old honors student named Darien Albert was tragically caught in a violent street melee on Chicago's South Side. Imagine a cell phone camera capturing a seemingly ordinary teen walking home from school, when suddenly he's engulfed in a chaotic brawl between rival student groups. This question lingers. What led an honors student into a senseless, deadly confrontation? The offenders emerged from fractured neighborhoods, Altgeld Gardens, and the Ville, where community bonds were strained, and youth violence had become tragically normalized. The sheer ferocity of the mob action raises unsettling questions. What psychological urgency drove these teens to join the attack? Was it fear of being targeted themselves? A surge of mob mentality, de-individuation, impulses amplified by peer pressure? In the interrogation of Eugene Riley, one defendant claimed he acted in defense of his brother. "I was scared. I didn't know what was going on." Yet the video evidence painstakingly disproved that narrative. Detectives secured cell phone footage that became the case's backbone. It was widely circulated, spurring national outrage and prompting a high-level response, including visits by the U.S. Attorney General and Secretary of Education. One suspect, Eugene Bailey, was detained based on early misidentifications by school staff, only to be cleared after more reliable witnesses recanted or offered conflicting accounts. The legal proceedings that followed brought complex appellate battles. Multiple offenders were charged as adults, including Sylvanus Shannon, Eric Carson, Eugene Riley, and Leopold Colbert. A juvenile was also convicted, and one defendant had charges dropped. In state appellate courts, defendants argued that the underlying felony mob action was inherent to the murder, or that jury instructions had been flawed. But judges upheld conviction and sentencing, affirming that the mob action element stood on its own. Inside the trial testimony, chilling clarity emerges. Prosecutors presented the video to the jury. In closing, the assistant state's attorney noted how Riley could have simply walked away, yet instead picked up a board and struck Darien again, even as the victim lay defenseless. Riley's claim, caught on tape, was that he had only reacted to protect his brother. The jury heard it all. At the sentencing hearing, the judge's words carried gravity. One defendant received 32 years, another 26, stark sentences that reflected both justice and societal warning. In remarks, the judge expressed hope that the sentence would resonate across the community. Case 10. Losham Ezel, Charles Johnson, Laird Stiles, and Trashal McCoy. It begins in media res, at the moment when four teenagers find themselves trapped inside a small interrogation room, the air heavy with suggestion and fear as police officers loom over them, each confession hanging in the balance, their futures traded for compliance. From that instant, an urgent investigation into a double homicide in a Chicago used car lot in 1995 that would reveal coercion, a shattered adolescence, and a decades-long fight for justice. When LaShawn Ezel, just 15, Laird Stiles, 16, Charles Johnson, 19, and Trashal McCoy, 17, became suspects, the psychological profile of trauma was immediate. Alone, isolated, without counsel, these young men faced relentless pressure. They signed confessions, some believing those papers were release forms. The psychological profile here shows how vulnerable minds under coercion, especially minors, can be driven to admit the unthinkable, even when innocence remains intact. There was no physical or forensic evidence connected them to the crime scene. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. Their confessions were the prosecution's only tether. In courtrooms during the legal proceedings and trial testimony, their words were wielded like proof of guilt. Johnson and Stiles received life sentences. Ezel 20 years, McCoy 55 years. Each sentencing hearing sealed away critical years of youth. But as years turned into decades, the momentum shifted. A landmark post-conviction effort led to a new forensic review. Fingerprint evidence from cars, stickers, interiors, when reanalyzed, implicated entirely different individuals. None of the prints tied to these four. Instead, they pointed to others with criminal records living nearby. The robustness of the investigation resurfaced, laying bare how flawed the original process had been. With mounting evidence that their confessions were false and could have been prevented, Cook County prosecutors vacated the convictions in 2017. Certificates of innocence were issued, clearing criminal records and offering a measure of legal clarity. But psychological wounds and lost years could not be returned. That brings us to the settlement. The city had finally acknowledged systemic failure. 6 years after their exoneration, In June 2024, Chicago's City Council approved a $50 million settlement, resolving 4 federal suits brought by the men. This victory was not just about money. It was symbolic. Taxpayers would cover $21 million, insurance another $29 million. It was one of the largest settlements in Chicago's history, recognizing that coercive interrogation methods, especially on minors, can lead to irreparable harm. In the wake of exoneration and settlement, Johnson and Stiles spoke publicly, visiting a high school classroom in May 2025 to share their story, urging reform. "I just did what he wanted me to do, not knowing I was signing my life away," Johnson reflected. Stiles added that support, not punishment, had guided him toward rebuilding his life, something many incarcerated individuals never receive. Case 11. Christian Acevedo. Just seconds after dismissal bell rings outside Benito Juarez Community Academy on December 16, 2022, a single question, "Are you with La Raza?" turns a routine afternoon into tragedy. That question, dropped in the courtyard under the bridge, from Christian Acevedo, once a student expelled for behavioral and attendance issues, would lead to the deaths of 2 teenage boys and forever alter many lives. Initially 16, Acevedo approached a group that included 15-year-old Brandon Perez and 14-year-old Nathan Billegas, asking about gang affiliation. The exchange felt tense, brief, a psychological moment loaded with undercurrents of territory, identity, fear. Perez questioned why. Acevedo turned away, and then turned around again, opening fire. 2 boys died. 2 others were wounded. The investigation unfolded rapidly. Surveillance footage captured Acevedo before and after the shooting, and a witness snapped a photo of him brandishing the gun over one of the victims. The shell casings collected matched to a single .357 caliber weapon. Witness identifications, including from a police officer familiar with Acevedo, sealed the link. He was arrested in February 2023 and held without bail, charged as an adult with multiple counts including first-degree murder and attempted murder. What was going on inside this offender's mind? The psychological profile hints at more than impulse. Expelled and allegedly gang-affiliated, Acevedo seemed driven by social allegiances, identity threats, seeing the question Raza, perhaps as a challenge to his status. The sudden escalation suggests a compulsive need to assert dominance when boundaries felt crossed. This tension underscores the profound role of adolescent identity, belonging, and instability in fueling violence. As the legal proceedings moved forward, he pleaded guilty on June 18, 2024 to 2 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder. In the sentencing hearing, Judge Mary Margaret Brosnahan imposed 2 consecutive 20-year sentences for murder and a 6-year term for attempted murder, requiring Acevedo to serve the full 40 years plus 85% of the remaining 6 years, totaling 46 years behind bars. His attorney called it a tragedy all around, noting he'll spend a significant portion of his life behind bars. There was no dramatic courtroom testimony. Guilt accepted swiftly, sparing witnesses from reliving trauma. But in that silence, the case still speaks volumes about public safety and preventive strategies. The investigation was swift and thorough because of effective surveillance systems, witness cooperation, and ballistic forensics, demonstrating how layered law enforcement strategies can bring accountability and urgency to justice. Beyond punishment, the case raises broader implications for rehabilitation. At 18, Acevedo faces decades in prison. His chance for education, behavioral intervention, or mental health therapy becomes critical inside, not outside. Case 12. Antonio Velasco. Just after 7:30 p.m. on February 25, 2024, a gathering in a West Chatham home in Chicago. Friends playing with a rifle, casual conversation, a sense of ease, turned abruptly perilous. Antonio Velasco, a 16-year-old acquaintance, returned to that room not with friendship but bearing a 9mm handgun with an extended clip. He ordered someone to pick up the rifle, then opened fire. 3 people died instantly: 14-year-old Amir Dees, 20-year-old Lad Everett Westringold, and a 36-year-old man. A 4th teen survived with a serious leg wound. In a matter of seconds, the investigation of a seeming hangout escalated into a triple murder scene. That immediate horror launched law enforcement into rapid action. The investigation that followed was meticulous. Police scoured surveillance footage, connected ballistic evidence, and identified Velasco and his 13-year-old brother fleeing the scene, carrying weapons, walking through neighborhoods, captured on camera. Still, faces remained indistinct. Only through coordinated police work did they locate Velasco at a relative's home in nearby Hazel Crest, culminating in his arrest. Examining the psychological profile of a friend who turned killer raises chilling questions. Authorities described Velasco as having been welcomed into the home as a friend, a gesture of trust that only deepens the betrayal. He allegedly approached the group with the rifle behind a TV, provocatively asked for it, then chose lethal violence instead. The psychology here is striking. A betrayal colored by calculated aggression and an abrupt eruption of violence, shattering normalcy in an instant. Legally, Velasco was charged as an adult. 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The decision to try a minor as an adult speaks to the gravity of the crime and the prosecutor's belief in its severity. At his initial court appearance, he was held without bail. The legal proceedings moved with solemn urgency, each hearing underpinned by public grief and prosecutorial determination that he has to be held accountable. As Cook County State's attorney put it, the trial testimony is expected to center on eyewitnesses, forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and statements from surviving victims and families. Though those transcripts aren't yet public, the narrative's arc is clear. Prosecutors will reconstruct the night minute by minute: Velasco's arrival, the altercation, his exit and return with a handgun, the trigger pull, the flight. Loved ones such as Amir's grandmother, who described Velasco as a big brother figure, will underscore the cruel betrayal, once closer than family. When the moment arrives for the sentencing hearing, justice will be measured in years behind bars. The courtroom will no doubt reflect the weight of grief, the call for accountability, and perhaps debate over rehabilitation. If these stories made you think twice, if they gripped you, shocked you, or left you craving to know what lies beneath the surface, hit that subscribe button now and join the Mindframe True Crimes family. Every week, we dive deeper into the hidden corridors of the human mind, unraveling the truths behind the headlines, and the secrets even courtrooms can't fully reveal. And to all my loyal subscribers and returning viewers, thank you for keeping your mind in the frame. You're the reason we can keep shining a light into the world's darkest corners. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, the mind is the most dangerous place of all. This is Mindframe True.